Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Danielle Horace, and I am so excited to welcome you all to More Than School Fireside Chat, powered by Rise. We call this event More Than School because now more than ever, haven't we seen that school is just so much more? It's more than tests and books and desks. Public schools have always been a place, I would call it a refuge, really, for warm meals, warm clothes, warm hugs. Our school communities are really so much more thanks to the efforts of our heroic and passionate educators and leaders like the ones we're speaking to today. I get the chance now, everyone, to introduce you to a colleague of mine, Dr. Don Coberly. He is the recently retired superintendent of Boise Public Schools after serving a whopping 38 years as a public school educator. Very excited to have him join as the current CEO of Rise Treasure Valley Education Partnership. So Don, welcome and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Danielle. Just a little bit about Rise for those of you who don't know. We are a nonprofit that's devoted to promoting public education, both in the Treasure Valley and across the state of Idaho. And we are fortunate today to have two guests, both superintendents. One is Wendy Johnson, who's the superintendent in the Kuna School District, and then my successor in Boise, Superintendent Coby Dennis. So welcome, you guys.
Hi.
Hi, Don. Thanks. Appreciate the opportunity.
Sure thing. So, let's start off this way. Would the two of you talk just a little bit? We'll start with you, Wendy. Talk a little bit about your background in education. How'd you get into education? Where'd you grow up? Blah, blah, blah. Did you ever think you were going to become a superintendent of a public school district? Kind of just generally your background.
Oh, yeah. I'll try to be succinct, which I'm not always known for, but my parents were both educators, and I grew up helping my mom in her kindergarten or fourth grade classroom. My dad was a chemistry teacher at Boise High, and I have pictures of myself, in his classroom as a young person. And every time I go into some of our chemistry classrooms here in Kuna, I always like the smell. They have a smell about them, and it just takes me back to growing up with my parents as educators. I was going to become a poet, and my mom, out of good motherly wisdom, suggested I get an education degree just in case that poetry thing didn't work out. And I'd done some work with some youth in an elementary school and in a high school, and my mom was right. She got me in the right direction in working with kids, and I just loved it. So I started my career in '93 as an English teacher out here in Kuna School District, and taught English, taught journalism, taught theater, taught speech, taught pretty much anything that needed to be taught, in that ELA world. And then I took a short kind of break from educating students, and I started working with teachers and administrators and helping them with getting their technology certification and teaching problem-based learning strategies and some of those sorts of things for a different organization. And then I came back to working in curriculum, working with administrators primarily, working with teachers, came back to the Kuna School District in 2005, and I never, ever thought I would be a superintendent. In fact, my dad was one of the people who started the teachers union back in the day in Boise School District, and he back in those days, administrators were kind of the enemy. And so I was actually kind of afraid when I got my administrative certificate that my parents were going to disown me, but things have changed a lot since back in those days. We are not enemies. We work together to help kids. So that's kind of my crazy connection. And actually, my family has a connection with Coby's because my dad and Coby's grandfather actually worked together at Boise High School. So my dad loves the Dennises. I'll say that. I'll turn it over to you, Coby. How's that?
So Wendy, how long have you been the superintendent in Kuna?
This is my 8th year as a superintendent, and I served, let's see, I guess 8 years prior to that as the assistant superintendent.
Okay, so you work for Jay Hummel out there.
I did. Yeah, he's the one who told me to go down. Actually, he didn't tell me. He just made me kind of experience it. And then when he was retired, he said, "This is yours. You should do this." And I never thought that would be where I would be. I thought I'd be a really good just kind of assistant and helper. And I'm glad he invested in me to make me believe I could do it.
Sometimes the job finds you.
Yeah.
And you grew up in the Treasure Valley, didn't you?
I grew up in good old Emmett, Idaho, small little community. We, a place where you didn't lock your doors and you could stay out all night as a young kid. And I grew up there, graduated from there, had amazing teachers. When I enrolled in college, man, it was easy for me because of the work that my educators, the educators in my life have done. So
right.
Shout out to Emmett.
Oh, there you go. So Coby, I know your family has a long background in education as well. Can you talk a little bit about your background?
Sure. I am actually a 4th generation educator here in Idaho. My great grandmother was a teacher in Hagerman, Idaho. And then Wendy talked about my grandfather being a teacher here. He was a small district superintendent for a number of years and ended his career as the assistant principal at Boise High School, where he got to work directly with Wendy's father. And then my dad was a superintendent here in the Boise School District, and now I have had the opportunity to do the same thing. So, I grew up here in Boise, went to school. I went to Jackson Elementary School, Maple Grove Elementary School, Amity Elementary School. The first year, the old building was open. So I got to experience that. And then South Junior High, Bora High School, and then went off to the University of Idaho, came back and then started teaching. Taught math in this district for a number of years. I taught every grade level 7 through 12. Did some coaching on the side at Bora and North Junior High School. And then had the opportunity to get into administration and was a school level administrator for about 10 years, and then got the opportunity to come up here and work with you, Don, directly as my boss, and became the deputy superintendent and then the superintendent. And like Wendy, never, ever thought of myself in the context of being a superintendent. It wasn't really anything that I even aspired to do. And to Don, to your point, sometimes the job finds you. When you decided to retire, and you did a lot to encourage me to do this. And so here we are. This is my 30th year in education. And so it's amazing to think that much time has passed and changes we've seen over my 30 years. And not to sidetrack, but just to illustrate, my first year as a teacher in the Boise School District, we didn't even have telephones in our classrooms.
I remember that. Yeah.
And so to think about where we are today, with the computers and the technology that we have, in comparison to the fact that in order to call a parent back in the evenings, I had to go down to the faculty room and in order to call a parent after school. So
that's right.
Amazing.
That's it. And I remember when we got air conditioning.
Yeah.
In the schools. I mean, there was a period of time where we didn't have air conditioning in any of our schools.
None of them. Yep.
Crazy. Well, so this is your second year?
Second year. Yep.
Time
Second
flies,
year.
Right?
But yeah, the timing of this was perfect.
Yeah, no doubt. So the timing for me was perfect too. I retired in the summer of 2019, right before COVID hit. But this last year, it's been a heck of a year for you guys. Can you just talk a little bit about, the stress that's happened, your board, how they've handled everything, where you are with it? I know you're two very optimistic people. So talk a little bit about where you've been and where it's going and what you see. Coby, you want to start?
Sure. It's been interesting. I talked to Lisa Roberts, our deputy superintendent, the other day, and reminded her that in our time in our positions, we've been in our positions longer during COVID than we were outside of COVID, which is kind of hard to wrap your head around. We had about 8 months as in the superintendency prior to COVID hitting. And now we've been in for almost an entire year during COVID. And so it's been an interesting challenge, to say the least. And I think probably just to kind of dig into it, I think a couple of the big challenges that we face is anytime we've had to make decisions, the community, and I'm talking whether it's legislators or local leaders or parents or teachers, every decision is a 50-50 split on what you should and shouldn't do. And I think that has created significant challenges on how you keep your school community together as you try and navigate the decisions that you have to make every single day.
Yeah.
The other thing that I would say that's been a real challenge is navigating fear, and because everything associated with COVID brings out fear in everyone. It's the fear of the unknown. It's institutions that you've always been able to count on being unstable or unsure about where you're supposed to go. So I think navigating fear has been a real challenge. And then probably the last thing I would say, and then I'll let Wendy jump in, is this idea that we have weaponized science. And I think that is something that has been very concerning to me. And I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. And Lisa said this in a board meeting the other day, and I think it really does illustrate what I'm talking about. We've gotten emails from parents who say, "Hey, please follow the CDC guidelines and reopen our schools."
Right.
The very next email will say, "Please follow the CDC guidelines and keep our schools closed." And so I'm not making a value judgment. I'm just saying that both sides of these issues have used science to weaponized it to make the point that they want you to make.
And don't you think that's the fear, Coby?
I think it's 100% the fear. I think all of those things kind of build upon each other, and is what has made this a really challenging year.
Yeah. Wendy?
I'll say ditto to what Coby said, but we're used to pleasing people. We're used to working through issues to get to the best solutions for our kids. And this was impossible. Getting to what's going to work for everybody, or even the majority, like the 80%. Boy, that was really, really hard this year. And I've said, this is my 26th year in Kuna. And it's been the hardest year I've ever had. But rather than reiterate what Coby's eloquently said, there are some things that have helped this not be as hard. One is the SIC superintendents, the Southern Idaho Conference superintendents, being able to meet with people who are going through the exact same challenges, talking through them, brainstorming, getting ideas, helping each other has been huge. And it did, because this, superintendency sometimes can be very lonely. You're the boss, and you can't tell your worries to other people. You got to kind of keep those to yourself, because you got to be strong, and so having colleagues that get it, it's really important. Our board has been awesome. They've been, tight. They've been, following the science, trying to find solutions, working through things. They helped each other. they've been amazing to lean in on as well. And our internal team has just been fabulous. My team in this office, our principals have worked so hard navigating this, because they're in charge of making sure learning still happens and it's safe,
Right.
regardless of what mode we're in. And that's a lot. That's been a lot of heavy lifting on their side of things. They've been amazing, and our teachers and staff. And then I would also add our community. I mean, even though they've been split, the kindness that we've seen has been amazing. I told Coby this the other day. I had a mom call and leave a message on my voicemail and said, I just want you to know that, because there's always stuff on social media about, we should do this or we shouldn't do this, and it's divided. And she just said, I want you to know there's a lot of us out there. We're rooting for you. We care about you. You're doing a great job. We appreciate you. And I made a copy of that voicemail, and I sent it to my whole staff just so that they could hear it too.
Wow. Yeah.
Because they needed it.
Yeah.
But so there have been some really kind people. And I think the biggest learning out of this is our communities need our schools.
Mm-hmm.
They need our schools. And even when somebody's angry because it's not how they need it to be for their kid, I get it. I get why. They depend on us to be their partner in this work. So
how are your teachers doing? I mean, you got great staffs in those two districts.
We have amazing teachers, amazing staff. I have to give kudos to our elementary teachers and staff to begin with. I mean, all of our staff's working super hard, but our community really, we're primarily commuter community. And about 80% of our families work outside of Kuna. And our families depended on us to be a part of their solution, to be able to let them, be able to work. And our elementary teachers started in-person learning 5 days a week, starting the beginning of October. They navigated, and it was hugely a challenge, especially when there was huge spikes in cases in Ada County. They navigated all of that, and it was tough. So I got to give them a huge kudos. And on the other side of that, we had a hybrid schedule in our secondary. Our secondary teachers have figured out, compacting curriculum. How do we make sure kids are learning still when they're not in person with us on that day when they're remote? We've had a teacher figure out how to teach online and in person at the same time, and we've called it. We've given it, his name, which I should say, Andrew Horning. He's amazing. We've called his strategy the Andrew Horning method in our school district now. Because of what he's, people have just been so creative in figuring out, how do I still help my kids learn, even though it's not the ideal situation right now. So amazing people. I'm lucky to work with them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and just to piggyback, I mean, Wendy said that more eloquently than I can, but I think it's important for the community to recognize just how hard our teachers have worked. I mean, when you think about where we were a year ago, almost to the day from when everything kind of shut down, our teachers have had to learn how to implement technology that they may or may not have been familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
They had to figure out how to take lessons that they know have worked when kids are in school, in person, and translate that to a digital format. And they've had to figure out how to keep kids engaged and motivated when all it takes for a kid to do is to turn off their camera. So that when I hear people talk in the community about, well, the teachers haven't done anything, they haven't been in session, I get angry about that, because I don't know that we've ever had a year where our teachers have had to work harder than what they do now. And so I say all that to give some context to the fact that our teachers are doing well, but they're learning. We talk as in education a lot about being lifelong learners. This year really put that to the test. We got to be students as well as teachers through this whole year. So I can't speak any more highly than I do about what our teachers have been able to pull off.
Yeah, it's been incredible, and yet, you know, something I hear being on the outside now and hearing some of the social media influences and the outside influences. It's just amazing to me that one of the things I was reading the other day is schools are closed, and yet Boise's going to give their teachers a raise, and you know, the unions are at fault and they're keeping kids out of school. And I know there was an incident over in West Ada, but it seems to me that in general, you guys as associations have worked really hard to keep things going. Can you speak to that?
Well, yeah, and I'll jump in and turn it over to Wendy. I don't know that we could have managed this without the cooperation of our association. You know, when everything, you learn about people in the hard times, not in the easy. And our relationship with our teachers is one of the reasons that I think we've been able to carry through this. Our teachers union and our association has never one time said we can't. Not one time. They've had concerns. But they come to the table in a solution-oriented manner so that we can find a path through this. And so, yeah, this isn't about the unions. This isn't about management versus unions. This is, like Wendy said earlier, this has to be about the entire school community coming together in order to get to where we are. We're going to start 5 days a week next Tuesday, and then we're going to have all of our secondary kids back the Monday after spring break. And it's because we've worked together that we're going to be able to do this safely. And I want to keep saying that. We've wanted to do this safely. And once we get there, everybody's all in.
Wendy?
Yeah, you did. You said exactly what I would say as well. Is I do think that our unions in general in the United States and in particular in Idaho have been blamed for things that it's not their fault. They didn't create COVID. They didn't create the unsafe environments. And I apologize if I'm going to be political for a moment, but some of the real challenges that we had in our school district were we couldn't address some of those safety issues because of the extreme the challenge that we've had for generations with funding in our school districts. To be honest, I'm going to be very specific to a thank you to our community, because we were able to move from online learning fairly quickly because our community had invested in devices for our children. If they hadn't done that, we wouldn't have been able to move as quickly. And I know that some of my colleagues were just bashed for not being able to all of a sudden have, thousands and thousands of devices to get out to kids. The only reason we were able to be in that position is because our local community supported it.
Yeah.
But back to your real question, which was the relationship. It really, we worked together in this work. We developed our reopening plan, our operational plan, our monitoring plan. We meet, we work together as a community, as teachers, as principals, as leaders, as a board to try to figure this out. It wasn't done to anybody. Now, parents may have felt that way a little bit because sometimes we weren't able to meet all their needs. Like I said, that's been the most challenging part of this work. But I'll acknowledge for me what is going on in Kuna right now is our board voted to stay in hybrid for the rest of the school year for grades 6 or 12. And they heard teachers saying, we have serious concerns about returning. And it wasn't so much safety. Although it was safety for kids, it was more about consistency for kids. And we've been in hybrid since the start of the school year. And we heard from parents that are like, hey, I like this. It's working. We don't want another change. We're used to this. Our kids are finally in a routine. They're able to experience things. But then we've also heard from parents that are angry. And so we're since that vote happened, we're actually at the table with a mixed group of people. We have teachers at the table. We have moms and dads at the table. We have leaders at the table that are trying to figure out a win-win for everybody. And if it was what has been painted in the media, we wouldn't be sitting at the table. Our union would have won, right? We would have stopped there if that's the narrative that's going on. But the reality is everybody's at the table trying to figure this out.
Yeah. Yeah. So I remember the days when we'd go to a board meeting and there'd be 20 people in the audience and we'd go, okay, that's not the case anymore. It doesn't seem to be a problem for you guys to have nobody attending your board meetings anymore.
It's an interesting statement, Don, because you're right. We don't have. I think we had a parent show up to one of our board meetings a week or so ago. It was the first visitor we had at a board meeting since really the started. But what's interesting is because we have had to go to this, we've had to broadcast a lot of our board meetings.
Right.
And I think at our last board meeting that we had when the decision was made to go back 5 days a week, we had over 800 people on watching the board meeting take place. So I think the community engagement has been much higher with our board than probably any time, at least in my career.
Yeah.
And so I think it's been good for us. And I think the other thing that I want to compliment is there's no question that our communities care about their schools. There is zero question about that. No matter whether you're happy with us or unhappy with us, they are engaged in what's happening, right?
So, that's a change. It really is. And in my career, there were times when we did a calendar change, there was a few other, students come first when we got some participation. But really in general, it was like, I don't want to go to a board meeting. That's boring, blah, blah, blah. But the issues now have peaked. No doubt the community's interest and you've really got active participation. It's a double-edged sword, right?
No question, it's a double-edged sword. But I think that, one of the things that, and I know Kuna is the same way, and that is we try and be transparent about what we're trying to do. Wendy talked about the committee that her district's going through. We did the same process as we started going through this as well. You bring the parents and the kid and the teachers and the administrators, both school level and central office level, and board members together to try and find solutions. And it's through those conversations that I think you continue to build the trust with the community because they know what you're trying to do. Now, if you don't like the decision, then you always attack the process. But the reality of it is it's when you have a culture of being transparent about what you do, then I think that people can live with the decision as long as their voice was heard. And I think that's the key to what we've been going through lately is giving people's voice. What's the word I'm looking for? That people get to own their voice and that we're listening to them. Right. It doesn't mean you get to get your way. It means we have a responsibility to listen to people and their decisions. And again, to go back to what we talked about, that's what has made this hard is 50% think you need to do this and 50% think you need to do that. But you have to have a process in place that allows for those voices to be heard.
Wendy?
I think the question originally was around board attendance and participation. I actually am excited about it, and I hope that we can continue to tap into that. There's been some technologies, of course, that have helped make that happen easier so that people can attend from, their home and still participate. And I like that. I hate having a board meeting when there's like just the people in the room or us.
Right.
This is the whole reason for a board meeting is it's a public meeting, So I'm hoping that when we're kind of through this challenge, that the engagement continues. Just as excited about it, whether or not we're going to reopen to in-person learning, when that's going to happen. I want that same level of engagement when we're talking about what do we do about our, reading, challenges. I want the same engagement as
Right.
What are we going to do? What next program are we going to add within career and technical education? So I hope that we've made it easier for people to participate and not just this temporary time of engagement. We need that engagement to make sure we're meeting the needs of the community and the hopes and dreams that they have for their children, but also so the community can hear some of our challenges and maybe help us, with some of those so that we're not isolated, because I do believe we reflect the desires of the community that we serve. So I know in the past it's been hard for that to be realized always, but I think we're going to have more engagement. I really do predict that, and I'm excited about that.
Yeah, I think that would be a positive. So you said something there, Wendy, with regard to reading or learning math or whatever. So let's hypothetically say we fast forward to August and the kids are coming back to school, and regardless of where we are this spring, you're all in full, all the kids are back. And everybody's worried about, well, wait a minute, there's been all this loss of opportunity for learning, and what are you going to do about that? And so what are you going to do about that? All the kids are going to show up, and then what? Do you move them around in grades, or what do you do?
We know what we're doing. We're professionals in the school district and in every school district. We regularly see children, whether they're coming from another district or whether they're coming to us new to school, whatever. We have benchmarks where we think kids should be, right? They're fairly arbitrary, to be honest. They're dependent upon maybe some curriculum expectations that we've established. By first grade, they need to know X, Y, and Z so that they can be ready for second grade.
Right.
But we regularly see kids just in a typical year that didn't meet those benchmarks in first grade when they showed up to second grade. And we have professionals that meet and they figure that out. They design a plan. We call them intervention plans often. It sounds scarier than it is, but really develop plans to help kids get the learning that they need in order to benefit from what the new content that's happening. But I guess I would look at this a little bit different. I've even had to get myself here because I've been like panicked about learning loss, and not that I'm always panicked about that. I mean, that's my job, is to make sure kids learn at high levels. Mm-hmm. But Coby said the word lifelong learning, and when a child learns something, when any of us learn something, we don't lose it. It's there. We may have to rekindle it. We may have to reconnect, review. But I don't want us to see that this year was all about loss. I think there's a whole bunch of things that kids gained. I think about, Coby spoke eloquently about all the things that our teachers learned. Kids learned some pretty amazing things too during this time. And some of them aren't going to be measured in a test necessarily, but I would just look at this as, if I'm a parent, I'm going to want to know, right, what can I do to help my child? Mm-hmm. What are the things that maybe my child is behind on? And when I say behind, I'm talking about what they may need to be in that next grade. So I'm a first grade student going to second grade. Maybe I didn't, one of the things we've been worried about is, some of the fine motor skills that you really focus on in the early grades, maybe didn't have as much time to write with a pencil, or a pen. But we can get a plan, and we will create a plan to make sure that child is ready to benefit. And I know that sounds overly simplistic, but I think the bigger issue for us when it comes from a resource side of thing, and this is where I hope this state focuses their time and energy, is not on what the loss, but it's the level, it's the amount maybe of support that we had. Maybe we'd have 15% of our kids that were constantly kind of working to kind of catch up. But we may have more students that are in that situation, but I have no doubt that we'll get them there. I think when we also talk about learning loss, we talk about, especially at the upper grades, we talk about experiences that kids may have missed out on.
Yeah.
And those are things that, again, they may have lost some of those experiences, but I know when they return, we're going to work like crazy to figure out how to compensate for that and get kids to where they need to get. One of our biggest challenges right now is in the secondary is the certifications that kids can earn through career and technical education courses. And so we're behind kind of where our goal is, but we also know that why does it just stop when, it's June 3rd, we might need to think about extending some of these opportunities that we haven't maybe done in the past, because we've learned all sorts of things. So that's a very long answer, but I hope it just, I guess my overall answer is that I don't want parents to panic. We have professionals that will help partner, and if a child is behind, they're not ready for their next step quite yet in certain areas, we're going to fill that gap. We're going to help you do that. That's our job.
Yeah, if I could just piggyback on some things that Wendy just said there, I think that she was very insightful in a lot of the things that she said. When I think one of the things that's important, and it may go back to a point I talked about earlier about managing fear through this. There's a fear that my kid isn't going to be ready for, and fill in the blank.
He's behind.
Yeah. That's a very real fear. And so I want to acknowledge the fact that we have a responsibility to articulate how we're going to deal with some of these things for our families. So let me try and give some examples of what I'm talking about. Number one, I don't think it's that we can continue to compare this year's, and I'm just going to use fifth grade as an example, fifth grade to last year's fifth grade. And I'll use an analogy that maybe works, maybe it doesn't work, but it's like trying to compare air travel pre 9/11 to air travel post 9/11. There's been an event in between there that has significantly changed how we do things. And so it's not a fair comparison to be looking at last year versus this year. We have to start thinking about how we move forward post pandemic. And so let me give you another example of what I'm talking about. We have to get hyper focused on our standards in the state of Idaho, hyper focused. So an example is one of the examples of a standard in English in ninth grade is to cite through strong, thorough textual evidence to support an analysis of a text. Now that's a lot of fancy words that mean a kid goes in, reads some text or passage, and then from that can pull evidence to support a position. That's a lifelong skill that translates no matter if you're reading an English book or if you are in a job at Micron. You have to be able to read text and pull evidence out of that text. We have typically over the years taught that standard through reading To Kill a Mockingbird. I'm trying to give a real concrete example.
Sure.
Okay, so we teach that through reading To Kill a Mockingbird. Well, to read that kind of a text in a classroom takes several weeks to do that. But the skill you get from reading it is what we're trying to get after. So as a school district, we will be able to change the text that the kid reads and still develop the skills that they need to move forward. So we need to stop getting focused on whether or not we read To Kill a Mockingbird and start getting focused on, can my kid read some text and pull evidence out of that? That may be a too technical an answer, but I'm trying to make the point that we can do this if we get focused on the standards rather than the novel of To Kill a Mockingbird.
No, I think that's a great point. So what you're basically saying is that the level of complexity of the text might not be as important as being able to accomplish that standard with a group of students.
And it's the standard that is what prepares kids post graduation.
Absolutely.
It's not whether or not they can name the characters in To Kill a Mockingbird. That's not the skill we're after.
Mm-hmm. I can do that, by the way.
I know you can. I know you can.
I was going to commend Coby for being a math teacher and talking about the standard. I'm really impressed.
I've tried to learn some things through this process as well.
Well, that's Wendy, the English teacher, talking to you too, right? But it's so true. You know, I mean, if you go to Micron and you're reading a technical manual, you have to do some of that same analysis and take things out of it to be able to write a summary or to, you know, operate whatever you're supposed to do. So it does apply across the board. That's fascinating discussion, you guys. I really do appreciate it. And by the way, while you were talking, I think I generated 50 more questions that I want to ask you. We've got just a few minutes left. So let's just finish this way. What gives you hope? What gives you hope for the future? What are you excited about? And let's just leave it at that. Why don't you go ahead and just talk about, you know, those things that you're looking forward to in the future?
You want me to start, Wendy?
Sure.
Number one, and this may seem very, very specific, but the vaccine gives me hope. And I think it's important for our audience to know that, you know, we have 83% of our staff has gotten at least one shot of the vaccine.
Wow.
It's awesome.
That's a high percentage. And Coby apparently just froze. So Wendy?
I'll say kids and teachers give me hope. I was in a kindergarten classroom this morning and they don't know there's a pandemic going on, right? Other than they have masks on and they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're there to learn. And I think when we get all of this crazy stuff, what I do when I get to that point is I go and see children. I go see them working with their teachers. That's what gives me hope.
Yeah.
Am I back?
Yeah, you're back.
Okay. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened there. So yeah, to piggyback from what Wendy just said, that is exactly what gives me hope as well. I get hopeful when I see how dedicated our staff has been. I get hope to go back to a point that Wendy made earlier about the kindness that our community and the grace that our community has shown through this. And I'll be honest with you, I think we're a better district today than we were a year ago. That gives me hope.
Yep. Yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree with that. So, you know, I wrote down, I want to talk about CTE and I want to talk about advanced placement. I want to talk about legislation that's coming up, and I want to delve further into the learning loss stuff. I wanted you to talk about what you miss in the classroom. I want to talk about what budgets are going to look like. So we have to do another episode, you guys, because there's so much more to talk about. And I think that people are really going to be interested in hearing more from you as educators. And even, you know, I know you missed the classroom, and Wendy, you were talking about it there for a second. But really what I want to say right now is just thanks so much for spending some time with us. I think people are going to be really interested in hearing from the experts in education about educational issues. So thank you.
Thank you, Don. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Take care.
Great fun. Bye.
Bye-bye.